Hi there, welcome to No Nonsense Whiskey. My name's VinPF, and on today's episode we've got something a little bit interesting to cover. Now, these guys are pretty new on the block. They are a couple of brothers who have started doing some independent bottles in a different way. Now, as you know on the show, I'm a big fan of independent bottlers, especially upstarts and new starts, to kind of see what they're doing interesting in the industry. And when they get in touch to say, do I want to try some bottles, then of course I'm willing to bring them to the channel. Especially something like this when they're doing something so interesting as I'll get into. Now, this is a bit of a tongue twister word, but actually not so much, as they're a big fan of saying on here. This is actually Na Braithrean, which means the brothers. You know, it's two brothers, and the idea behind these bottles are interesting, is that each release is two different bottles, but it's the same cask of whiskey that's been split and aged in different ways to kind of give two different perspectives on the same dram, really kind of delving into that cask influence and the differences between those. Now, obviously, you see here I have the bottle of the Big Brother. This is a 9-year-old. It's a Caol Ila 9-year-old. And down here, they were kind enough to send me a sample of the then sold out Wee Brother. Now, of course, this one has now sold out as well, unfortunately, from their website. But I'm pretty sure you can still get hold of this from some retailers if you're savvy enough, if you get on it pretty quickly. They're not cheap whiskies. This wee one was about £75. This one's about 80. But what you're getting is cask strength Caol Ila that's been independently bottled, non-chill filtered, natural coloured, and in this case finished in something interesting. This is a PX finish. This one is not. I'll go into those individually in a moment. So really, we've got a kind of dual review today of two different bottles. But also, if you can't get hold of these bottles, not to worry. They're going to be doing more stuff like this coming on. You know, these are both sold out, so they've been pretty successful for these guys. So hopefully they're going to be doing more interesting stuff going forward. So really, what you want to be doing is going and checking out their social medias, checking out the website, lock them into your own kind of follows and whatnot, and really catch up with what they're doing. So let's talk about the Wee Whiskey and the Big Brother together, I guess, but we'll talk about the Wee Whiskey first. Now, the first thing they did was catch a single cask of Caol Ila. This is an 8-year-old whiskey, and it was aged in a refill hogshead ex-bourbon barrel. It's pretty standard stuff, to be fair. They then split that out and bottled whatever proportion of it. I think there's around 100 bottles of this Wee Brother knocking around. So, of course, like I said, it sold out like half a year ago or something like that. Probably going to be pretty hard to get hold of. But I have to say, Caol Ila is a pretty common flavour profile. The really interesting one is the PX, but we'll get into that in a moment. Now, I said it's cask strength as well. This is 60.2%. And as I mentioned, it is expensive at £75, but if you really look at what you're actually getting for that, sure, it's an 8-year-old whiskey, but a cask strength Caol Ila isn't hard to come by, but it is around that sort of price point. I think it's fair enough. Let's have a look at it and see what we've actually got on the flavour profiles, and then we'll move on to the Big Brother. So you can see it's a pretty typical colour for a Caol Ila, like non-chill filtered, natural coloured, kind of straw-like, but we're not too bothered about that here. I like things, especially younger whiskey, younger Scotch, really should be shown at its natural colour to kind of give us an idea about what we're getting. And of course, this is a refill bourbon, not a first fill, so that means that it's had bourbon in it, it's been shipped over, it's had some whiskey in it in the past for an unknown period of time, then it's been refilled again, so the colour influence isn't going to be that high over 8 years. Anyway, enough of that, let's get into the nose and see what we've got. Now, of course, it's going to be peaty. Very peaty, in fact, it's not the peatiest ever, but it's a very peaty Caol Ila. It's sea salty, it's briny, bit of seaweedy in there as well. It's a non-medicinal peat, so it's not kind of like, you know, Ardbeggy, Lafroig-y ashiness. It's a nice warming peat fire. It's a bonfire, that kind of thing. Really nice. If you're into kind of peat in any way, shape or form, tasty. I have to say as well, of course, both of these are obviously fairly peaty. If you're not into your peated whiskies, it's probably going to be a miss for you anyway, so I wouldn't rush out and get it. But keep an eye on the guys, because they might not just do peaty whiskies. They might do some other stuff as well in the future. I don't know their plans. Check them out on their socials. Let's try on the palate. Now, I've been really getting into my peat over the last couple of years. Oh, that's so tasty. One of the things I like about Caol Ila versus some of the other distilleries on the island of Islay is that they have a kind of sweetness that's there at the back end. And that's what I'm really getting here. The vanillas aren't too vibrant because obviously we're talking about a refill, but that's good. It's not overtaking any of the smokiness at all, but there is that extra element of sweetness there that's really bringing it a nice rounded thing. Considering it's 60%, I would say it's a very well-rounded whiskey indeed. Now, ordinarily I probably would swill out with some water or something like that, but because we're talking about the same whiskey that's just been added to, let's say, I want to keep those flavours in my mouth for this one here. I don't want to reset my palate. I want to see what tastes different to this. So my idea with this anyway, and I think the boys' idea of this, is to have these side by side if at all possible. And then what you will do is you'll try them side by side like I'm about to do. And the flavour profiles that are in this one that are also in this one will probably cancel out a little bit, and you'll get a kind of extra element of those new flavours that have been imparted by the new cask. Let's get on to the 9-year-old. So this is the Big Brother. It's, again, also a Caol Ila. It was aged for 8 years in this barrel. This was the same whiskey that's been split off and has been aged again, and another year or so, I guess, in a PX, Pedro Jimenez sherry cask, which is pretty cool. You know, I'm not usually into my sherry casks. Mostly Oloroso is what I don't like. Pedro Jimenez as well is probably a little bit too heavy for me. But I'm always interested to see what the finish of that does to especially peaty whiskies, because I quite like how PX mingles in with smoke. But we'll get into that anyway. So yeah, this has been aged for an additional year. It's now a 9-year Caol Ila sherry cask finished. Now you can see, I don't know like how fresh this sherry cask was, but I imagine pretty damn fresh considering a year, this versus this. It's pretty astounding, I have to say. Let's get onto the nose on this and see what we've got, shall we? Oh, I should say it's 58% this one is, so you can see how it's lost a little bit of ABV over the extra year, maybe during the transfer process or whatever. A little bit more expensive for that extra year, the change of it all. Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm going to go in for a bit of a nose, change the nose. I mean, now that I know they're side by side, you can kind of tell that they're the same whiskey that's been altered with. But there's this ever so slight addition of some dried fruits there, the kind of things you would expect from sherries, kind of raisins, sultanas, that sort of thing. But everything else is there that you would expect, the kind of peat smoke. It's not ashy again, it's obviously really nice warming peat. That sea saltiness is still there. Really nice. Let's try on the palate. Wow. I'm going to leave that in because ordinarily I would cut the kind of silence there, but you probably just noticed me having a little moment with myself. That's really, it's so tasty. It's so tasty. You can see I've been enjoying this a little bit. This is one, ordinarily when I get sent bottles, I tend to share them out as much as I can, but I think I might keep this to myself because this is a good one. Actual tasty notes. So it's pretty typical again of the differences we've seen with the nose. Everything there's with the palate. It's the kind of sweetness that's going on there. Obviously, if you'd have had just this, you'd have thought, the sweetness is coming from the PX, which of course it is, a certain amount of it. But the sweetness of the original whiskey is still shining through. Lots more of them dried fruits that you assume you would get from a sherry, the kind of, those raisin sultanas that I mentioned before. Dare I say a little Christmas cakey? It's a pretty typical tasty note to pull out for a sherry cask, but there's a reason for that. It is true. Oh, that's really tasty. Now, as I said at the start of the show, PX I could be a bit hit or miss with. I really do like how it interferes, because it does interfere rather than kind of intermingle. I really like how that interferes with the kind of peaty smoke that goes on with Islay whiskies aged in PX, or at least finished in PX. It's one of my favourite kind of flavour profiles at the moment, even though I haven't had much chance to cover them on the channel. So in any case, this is the first opening salvo from Na Braithrean. Something that I'm very interested in now. I hadn't heard of them before they got in touch with me, I have to be honest, but they're very much on my radar now. Hopefully, they're not going to wait too long before their next release. As I said at the top, they've sold out of these 2 bottles now, so if you do manage to get hold of a bottle, crack on with it, because I think you won't be disappointed, even at a kind of that sort of price point, that 75, 80. Do keep an eye on them. I don't want to suggest that you go looking for them on the secondary market. That's not what I'm about on here. If you're desperate, of course, that's what you're going to have to do probably if you can't find these on like Master of Malt. I think Master of Malt are still in stock. Go and check them out while you still can. But yeah, that's my introduction to Na Braithrean. I'm very impressed. Hopefully you are too, if you can even get hold of these things. But do keep an eye on their socials for the next release.